Remember when New York didn't feel safe, clean, or calm, when the city didn't soften itself for kids, when it smelled like hot garbage in the summer, brake dust in the subway, and cigarette smoke everywhere, when the noise never stopped, sirens shouting, trains screeching, radios blasting from open windows. Remember when being a kid in New York meant learning rules no one ever wrote down? This wasn't a playground city in the 1970s. It was a city fighting to survive. And if you grew up here back then, you didn't just live in New York, you learned it. This isn't about exaggeration. This is about the 15 specific things only New York kids from the 70s truly understand. The things that shaped how you walk, how you think, and how you handle the world even today. So let's go back to a city that was loud, broke, dangerous, and unforgettable, and remember exactly what growing up there really meant. The 1970s were one of the hardest decades in New York City's history. The city nearly went bankrupt in 1975. Crime rates were high. Infrastructure was crumbling. Entire neighborhoods were burning, abandoned, or falling apart, especially in places like the South Bronx. This was the era of graffiti-covered subways, rolling blackouts, garbage strikes, and streets that taught you awareness fast. And if you were a kid then, you didn't get a filtered version of the city. You got the real one. Stick with me, because every one of these memories builds on the last. By the end, you won't just remember what it was like growing up in New York in the 70s, you'll understand why it shaped you the way it did. These aren't random stories. They're the moments that taught you awareness, independence, and toughness before you even knew those words. And by the time we reach the last one, you'll see why growing up in that city gave you something most people never get: the ability to stay steady when life gets loud. So let's go back block by block, memory by memory, and remember exactly what made you a New York kid. Remember riding the subway alone as a kid, not with a parent, not with anyone watching over you. Just you, a token in your pocket, and a picture of the city already built inside your head. You learned fast which cars felt safer and which ones didn't, which doors to stand near, which spots to avoid. You stood instead of sitting, you held the pole tight and kept your feet planted. You didn't lean, you didn't relax, you didn't stare at people, you didn't smile at strangers. You kept your face neutral and your eyes moving just enough to stay aware. In the 1970s, the New York City subway was rough. Crime was common, trains broke down, platforms were dim and loud. Entire subway cars were covered in graffiti from end to end, windows scratched, lights flickering as the train rattled through tunnels. Sometimes trains stopped between stations. Sometimes doors didn't open right away. You learned not to panic. You learned the system like a second language, which lines ran late at night, which exits put you closest to home, which stations you moved through quickly without stopping. You didn't feel brave, you didn't feel reckless. You felt prepared, you weren't scared, you were alert. There's a smell only New York kids from the 70s remember, not one smell, a mix of them. Hot trash baking on the sidewalks all day long. Rotting food stuffed into black garbage bags stacked high along the curb during sanitation strikes. Wet concrete, car exhaust, cigarette smoke, and dirty hydrant water all mixing together in the heat. In the summer, the city didn't just look tired. It smelled tired. New York went through major garbage strikes in 1968 and again in 1975. Trash sat out for days, sometimes weeks in certain neighborhoods, bags burst open, food spoiled, rats ran freely, bold and unbothered, flies filled the air, the heat made everything worse. The sun pressed down on the streets and there was no escaping it. You smelled the city before you even stepped outside. Summer wasn't just hot, it was heavy, thick, sticky, but you didn't complain, you learned to deal with it. You breathed through your mouth when you had to, you walked a little faster. You accepted that this was just part of living here. And even now, decades later, one whiff of hot garbage or wet pavement can take you right back to those summers, standing on a New York sidewalk, heat rising off the street, thinking this was just how the world worked. July 13, 1977. You remember that date even if you didn't know it mattered at the time. That night, lightning hit a power station upstate, and just like that, New York went dark. Lights cut out, fans stopped. Elevators froze, TV screens went black in the middle of shows, radios crackled then went quiet. The summer heat didn't leave, it just sat there heavy and sticky. At first it felt strange, almost calm, then the sirens started, looting broke out across the city, fires burned in the distance. You could hear glass breaking, shouting, alarms going off block after block. More than 1,600 stores were looted or destroyed before the power came back. As a kid, you remember sitting in the dark with candles on the table, flashlights passing from hand to hand. Battery radios turned up, adults leaning in, listening closely. Your parents spoke in low voices. Windows stayed shut, doors stayed locked. You were told to stay inside and stay close. The blackout wasn't just about losing electricity. It was the night you realized how fast things could change. How thin the line was between normal and chaos. And once you lived through that night, you never looked at the city the same way again. Don't run unless you absolutely have to, don't look scared, and never act lost even when you were. You learned to walk like you knew exactly where you were going even if you didn't. Head up, shoulders steady. Eyes moving but not too much. You learned how to blend in. If something felt wrong, you crossed the street early. You didn't wait to be sure. You trusted that feeling in your stomach and moved on. You learned which adults felt safe and which ones didn't, which corners to pass quickly, which blocks to avoid altogether. These lessons came from watching, listening, and paying attention, not from being told. No one ever sat you down and explained these rules. You picked them up on the way to school, on the subway, standing on street corners, just being out in the city. Because in 1970s New York, being aware wasn't extra. It wasn't being cautious. It was how you made it home. You didn't need a backyard. Most of the time, you didn't have one anyway. You had the street. That strip of pavement outside your building wasn't empty space. It was your playground. Your meeting place, your whole world. You played stickball with a broomstick and a pink rubber ball, aiming for sewer covers and lampposts like they were bases. Someone always argued about whether the ball was fair or foul, and the game never really ended. It just paused when a car came through. Skelly was drawn in chalk right on the pavement. The lines faded, got redrawn, faded again. Everyone knew whose turn it was. Everyone knew the rules, even if they changed slightly every block. Double Dutch happened between parked cars, ropes slapping the ground while kids jumped in and out without missing a beat. Music came from open windows. Someone counted, someone tripped, someone laughed. And in the summer, the fire hydrant was everything. Someone loosened the cap, water shot into the air, and the whole block cooled off at once. Kids ran through it, shirts soaked, shoes ruined, parents yelling but not stopping it. Cars slowed down, drivers waited. Nobody honked, everybody understood. The street wasn't dangerous to you. It wasn't something to fear, it was home. You learned balance from dodging traffic, speed from racing the light, awareness from knowing when to move and when to stand your ground. You learned how to share space and when to claim it. Entire subway cars covered in graffiti, not one tag. Not a name in the corner, the whole train from front to back. In the 1970s, graffiti exploded across New York's subway system. Trains, tunnels, station walls, rooftops, everything became a canvas. Whole cars rolled into stations painted from top to bottom, windows half-covered, doors layered with color and names you couldn't read. But back then, no one called it art. It was just there. Everywhere, part of the ride, part of the city. You didn't stop and stare when a train pulled in. You didn't point it out. You didn't think, wow, that's creative. You just stepped on and grabbed a pole. To you, graffiti wasn't special or shocking. It was as normal as flickering lights, rattling tracks, and the smell of the subway. It blended into the background, like noise you stopped hearing after a while. Only years later did people start calling it culture. Only later did it end up in museums and history books. But when you were a kid in 70s New York, it wasn't art. It was just the skin of the city you grew up in. The bodega wasn't just a store. It was part of your daily life. It was where you bought loose candy for a few cents, one piece at a time, where milk crates sat out front and someone was always leaning on them talking, where the bell above the door rang every time you walked in. The owner knew your face, not just your name, your family. They knew who your parents were, which building you lived in, and what you were usually sent to buy. You ran errands there alone even when you were small. Milk, bread, butter, and yes, cigarettes for your parents, no questions asked. You held the coins tight in your hand, counted them twice, and made sure the change was right. You learned how to speak up. How to say please, how to say thank you, how to stand at the counter and wait your turn with adults twice your size. You learned trust both ways. They trusted you to come back, you trusted them to look out for you. That corner store didn't just sell food, it helped raise you, police, fire trucks, ambulances, all day, all night. In the 1970s, New York had some of the highest crime rates the city had ever seen. Fires were common. Accidents happened constantly, and police were always responding to something. That meant sirens were never rare, they were everywhere. At first, every siren made you look up. You'd stop playing, you'd wonder what happened this time, but after a while something changed. You stopped reacting. The noise faded into the background. Sirens became just another sound of the city, like traffic honking, trains rumbling underground, or voices echoing down the block. You could be eating dinner, doing homework, or lying in bed at night, and the sirens would pass by without pulling your attention away. They didn't shock you anymore, and that's when you realized something important. This city didn't slow down for danger. It didn't stop for fear. Life kept moving. And so did you, and this is where it hits you. Growing up in New York in the 70s didn't just make you tough. It trained you to read situations instantly, a skill you still use today. You saw burned out buildings everywhere, whole rows of them, blackened walls, empty window frames. Stairwells that led to nothing because the steps were gone. Some blocks looked like no one lived there anymore. Buildings boarded up, doors hanging off hinges. Lots where houses used to be now filled with trash or weeds. In the 1970s, places like the South Bronx became known across the country for decay and fires. Some buildings burned because of bad wiring. Others burned after landlords walked away, leaving places unsafe and neglected. Night after night, you saw fire trucks and smelled smoke in the air. You heard adults say the Bronx is burning. You heard it on the news, you heard it on TV, and as a kid you knew exactly what they meant. But here's the part people forget. You also saw people stay. Families still lived there. Kids still went to school. Neighbors still watched out for each other. People swept sidewalks in front of buildings that barely stood. Life didn't stop just because things were falling apart. You learned something important early on. A neighborhood could look broken on the outside and still be full of life on the inside. And that lesson stayed with you long after the city started to change. Even as a kid you knew, this block fine, that one not today, no signs, no maps, no one had to warn you. You felt it the moment you turned the corner. The street was too quiet or too loud. The wrong people were hanging around. Something just didn't sit right, so you adjusted without thinking. You crossed the street early. You took the longer way home. You slowed down and waited for a car to pass, or you sped up and kept moving. You didn't make a big deal out of it. You didn't panic. You just listened to that feeling in your gut and moved on. That instinct stayed with you. Even now, you still read places the same way. Remember sliding your keys between your fingers as you walked home. Cold metal pressed against your knuckles, ready not because you planned to use them, but because it felt safer to have them there. No one sat you down and explained it. No parent gave a long warning speech. You just saw older kids do it. You saw adults do it, so you did it too. It was quiet preparation, not fear, just awareness. You walked a little faster. You kept your head up. You watched reflections in shop windows. You listened for footsteps behind you. Every sense stayed switched on until you reached your front door. Then you relaxed. You slipped the keys back into your pocket, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. And you never once thought of it as brave. It was just how you got home. 3 major networks, that was it. ABC, CBS, and NBC. No endless channels, no scrolling, no escape. Every night the local news came on and the same stories filled the screen. Fires in apartment buildings. Robberies, arrests, missing people. Grainy footage, shaky cameras, reporters standing in the dark with flashing lights behind them. The anchors spoke calmly, even when the city felt like it was coming apart. No panic, no drama, just facts delivered in steady voices. You watched with your family, usually after dinner. No one shielded your eyes, no one changed the channel. You sat there and took it all in. Television didn't frighten you. It showed you the city as it really was. It taught you to pay attention, to understand danger, and to grow up just a little faster than kids today ever have to. You weren't just from New York, you were from somewhere specific. Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, Manhattan. Staten Island, and that wasn't a small detail. That was who you were. People didn't ask, "Where are you from?" They asked, "What borough?" because your borough meant something. It shaped how you talked, how you moved, how you saw the city. You defended it even if you complained about it. You represented it in school, on the street, everywhere you went. You might argue with kids from other boroughs, but it was all understood. This was your place, your ground. Your borough wasn't just where you lived, it was part of your identity, and you carried that pride with you for life. You walked yourself to school, not once or twice, every day. Rain, snow, heat, it didn't matter. You watched younger brothers and sisters while your parents worked. You made sure they got home safe. You made sure they ate. Sometimes you felt older than you actually were. You ran errands alone. To the bodega, to the laundromat, sometimes across several blocks. You carried lists in your pocket and money folded tight in your hand, already knowing not to lose either. Adults trusted you not because they wanted to push responsibility on you, but because there was no other choice. Life moved fast in 1970s New York, and everyone had to do their part, even kids. So you grew up fast, but you didn't feel cheated. You didn't feel angry about it. You learned how to handle things on your own. You learned how to think, decide, and act without waiting for help. You became capable. Here's the honest truth. You never thought you had a hard life. You didn't sit around feeling sorry for yourself. You didn't compare what you had to anyone else. This was just life. The city was rough, loud, and unpredictable, but it was normal to you. You played in the streets. You joked with friends. You found ways to have fun, even when things weren't easy. You learned early that complaining didn't change anything. It didn't make the streets safer. It didn't fix broken buildings or quiet the sirens, so you didn't complain. You adjusted. You figured things out. You kept moving, because New York didn't reward whining. It rewarded toughness, awareness, and the ability to get on with it. And without realizing it at the time, that mindset stayed with you for life. So those are the 15 things only New York kids from the 70s truly understand. Riding subways alone without a second thought. Learning street rules early, long before anyone explained them to you. Living through blackouts, garbage strikes, and everyday chaos that felt normal at the time. Playing in the streets, trusting your instincts, and learning how to stand on your own fast. That city didn't make things easy for you. It didn't slow down or soften itself just because you were a kid. But it gave you something else. Awareness, adaptability. The confidence to stay calm when things feel uncertain. You didn't just survive New York. New York shaped you. And even now, decades later, that city still walks with you wherever you go, in how you move, how you think, and how you handle life when it gets tough. If this brought back memories, you already know, you didn't grow up soft, you grew up ready.